Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys a little bit about my novice strength standards and why I have them and what they actually mean. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Because I do have strength standards I put out for novices, and a lot of people say, hey, you know, those are too generic. That has nothing to do with the novice linear progression or any of that, because they get caught up in like starting strengths terminology. And what people need to understand is that the novice strength standards I have are not necessarily that you're not a novice anymore if you haven't reached them. What it essentially means is that you don't have a strength base if you haven't reached them. And if you don't have a strength base, then you don't need things like exercise variation. You don't need things like cutting, like you don't need to be cutting down unless you're obese and you need to cut down for health reasons. You don't need any sort of complex training programming. And that's the reason I have those in place. Now, a lot of people are already really familiar with my more advanced strength standards. What is it that I tell guys? That if you want to be jacked and look like you lift and be a natural, I have 5 strength standards that I put out. Now, there are reasons I use standardized lifts for these. If people wanted to do non-standardized lifts, that's a whole different animal. That's a whole different animal, and there's a whole topic for that that almost needs to be its own video, why it becomes more difficult to judge your strength standards on other lifts and how you go about doing that. But I do use standardized lifts. I use the squat, bench, deadlift, the press, which is the strict standing press, and the weighted pull-up or weighted chin-up. And the latter one I throw in is a control for body fat, right? That's why we have it there. In other words, I tell guys, if you want to look like you lift and you want to be jacked as a natural to where when you walk down the street, the average person goes, oh, that guy lifts, right? That's what we're looking for. That you're pretty well developed top to bottom with no major muscle weaknesses, right? I don't mean from a bodybuilding perspective, but just, walking down the street, general appearance. You're going to look like you lift top to bottom, right? And that's, I tell guys, 500 deadlift, 400 squat, 300 bench, 200 press, and 100 pounds of added weight to your body weight on a pull-up or a chin-up. Notice I don't set those based on body weight. I don't adjust for height, any of that stuff, right? Because you need less muscle the shorter you are to lift any given amount of weight, and more muscle the taller you are. Those are going to be good proxies. The only people who are going to be way outside of that are people who are outliers. Most of my audience are in English-speaking countries. We have reasonably standardized heights. 90% of the population is going to fall within a reasonable height range, right? Only a tiny number of people are going to be shorter than about 5'6" or taller than about 6'1", right? A very tiny percentage of the population falls outside of that for men. So we don't need big variations. And I set that there with the latter one there as a control for body fat, because it is very, very difficult to have big legs, because you could squat 400 and deadlift 500, you've got leg development, and carry a lot of body fat while being able to add 100 pounds to a pull-up or a chin-up from a dead hang, right? It's very, very difficult. You've got to be way over muscle to pull that off if you're fat. So you're going to have to be at a reasonable body fat to hit all 5 of those strength standards. A lot of people can hit 4. Hitting all 5 is the key. So it doesn't matter that you excel at 1 or 2 of them. If you can't hit all 5, don't complain when you don't have the goal. I said all 5 of them. It's not that, hey, you'll look like you lift if you can do 4 out of 5. I never said that. I said the 5 out of 5. It's there for a reason. So people say, well, what about the novice? What about people who aren't advanced? What do you consider to be a strength base? Well, we go back to my point. A strength base, I only include 4 general lifts. 4 lifts. I tell guys what I want you to do. I want you to be able to deadlift 4 plates aside. That's 405, or about 180 kilos, right? It's 4 plates. Be able to squat 3 plates aside, bench 2 plates aside, and press, overhead press, 1 plate per side. That's a strength base. I don't have anything listed for pull-ups or chin-ups, and I generally don't, because I don't care about your body fat when you're building a base. You can worry about your body fat later. In fact, I'm going to go on a limb and say that if you're too worried on your body fat, that's the people who say, I can never hit those standards, because you're afraid to bulk. It's guys who stay 150 pounds, they're afraid of gaining any body fat, therefore they're afraid of bulking, afraid of gaining muscle mass. that struggle to hit those. Those are the people who come back to me and say, well, I've been training 2 years and I can't hit those numbers yet. Yeah, because you never bothered to gain muscle because you were afraid to eat. Let's be realistic here. If you're going to look at building a base, you need to build a base and worry about refining that base later. You need to worry about weight classes for strength sports later. You need to worry about getting cut later, right? This is stuff you worry about after you've built the base. And a lot of guys will be training for 3 years, 4 years training, and never build their base. They don't reach those numbers because they're afraid of that. You know what? It is not unhealthy for you to bulk up to 18% body fat. It is not unhealthy, all right? 20% is usually considered to be the limit for healthy males, right? The doctors and other people say you probably don't want to go over about 20%. Bulking up to near that limit is not unhealthy, it's not unsafe, and you're not going to do it for years on end. If you just bulk for 1 year, almost any one of you healthy young men or even middle-aged men can reach those strength standards I gave. Your entire focus of your training, I mean, I'm not telling you not to do some curls and some back work. All my programs, before people say, well, why don't you have back strength standards in there? Every single program I have has pull-ups, chin-ups, rows, something like that in there with a lot of volume. So let's not act like they're not in there. Every program I have. I just don't have standards for that because they vary too much from person to person, and I don't want people too obsessed with their body weight, particularly being too light. I want people to gain muscle to build a base. You don't need exercise variation. Until you reach those 4 numbers that I just laid out, you don't need to be doing different lifts. You don't need to say, oh, I need to add in dips or dumbbells for my chest. You don't need any of that. You need a bench, 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 bench. Closed grip, wide grip, that's fine. You can do both. You don't need to do other stuff. You need to overhead press. You need a bench press. You need to squat. You need to deadlift. You need to be doing some back work, whether it's rows or pull-ups, chin-ups, whatever your program calls for. I have multiple programs out there. That's what you need to focus on. You don't need exercise variation. You don't need any form of periodization. You need to be pushing some form of linear progression, maybe linear periodization. You might need a mild linear periodization if you stall. And you need to be eating and hammering those lifts with some sort of extra back work, those 4 lifts, into the ground. You need to focus on those until you can hit those numbers. And if you can't hit those numbers, you have not built a base. It means you probably are afraid to eat, or you're doing too much goofing off in the gym and changing exercises and other stuff more often than you need when you don't have a base. It's fine to change exercises when you have a big base built, right? Because you always return to your old lifts, your strength, and regain from there. And lifts carry over. You can rotate between dips and bench press when you get more advanced, right? When you can bench 300 pounds, you can rotate between those for different variation and things. That's fine. But until then, especially if you're benching less than 225, you have no business rotating exercises. It's going to slow you down. It's going to make you weak. You don't need exercise variation. You don't need muscle confusion. You need to focus on those lifts, gaining muscle, gaining weight, getting strong on those 4 lifts with some extra back work of some type. That's what you need. And until then, you don't have a strength base. And once you have a base, then you can do other refinement, right? You can work on other stuff. You can work on cutting leaner. Now, the trick is, what's interesting, morbidly obese people, I've seen guys who've run some of my free programs who dieted the entire time and still reached those numbers. Why? Because they were already bulked. They already had the calories to recover and everything already there, and they just slowly lost weight while reaching them. But the skinny guy's going to have to bulk to get there. Build your base. Build your base. And that's why I have those strength standards the way I do. And I don't throw anything in there related to as a control for body weight or body fat. Because you do need to bulk. And I'm not telling you to get morbidly obese. I'm not telling you to get really fat. But being 18 or 19% body fat is not fat by any medical definition. And it's a process. It is about the process. It's not like you're going to start training and in 3 months be where you want to be. You need to understand you're going to have to do these things in steps. But yeah, it is a process, guys, and you have to follow that process, and you're going to have to accept at certain points that you're going to have to focus on certain exercises for long periods of time to build your base. You're going to have to be willing to bulk up a little bit. You can't be afraid of gaining a little bit of body fat unless it's going to compromise your health. So, I mean, obviously, if you're obese, you're going to have to cut down. But if you're not obese and you're skinny, and you're not big, you're walking, if you're 5'8" and you walk around at 150 pounds and you wonder why you still haven't built a base, the answer is because you didn't focus on the right lifts and you're afraid to eat. You didn't build a base. And that's why you're still small and you're still weak. It's as simple as that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.